Right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. From where I am here in Daegu, South Korea, welcome to Medieval Story Time with the creative Contessa. I know it's been a while since I've been live. I've been traveling, and my travel schedule and where I've been staying just has not allowed for any kind of live streaming. I didn't have the space for it, the private space for it, nor the private time because I was visiting family and friends. But I am in Korea and my time is now my own again. And I'm not even vaguely over jet lag, but I'm just leaning hard into it. So it is early morning here in South Korea. Welcome to my outdoor studio. It is blazing out here during the day. And so I am taking advantage of the cool mornings to get out and to share this beautiful riverside space with you while we have medieval story time together. So first things, if you are out there, can you please let me know if you can hear me or not? Because, yeah, as always, I can't tell if I'm audible or not. So, yeah, good morning, Susan. Thank you for joining me this morning. Today, we're going to be reading from a medieval miscellany. This is one of my really recent book recommendations. This is a collection of fantastic primary source texts, stories, chronicles, poems, songs on a wide variety of topics spanning the entirety of the Middle Ages from late antiquity all the way up to about 1500, including Byzantium, so the Eastern Roman Empire. So it's not even just Western European focus. So it's really been an eye-opening experience for me to read, honestly, texts I would not normally encounter in my 15th century focused life. So yeah, a medieval miscellany. And I've picked some fun, some fun things to read today on a wide array of topics. So yeah, audio is okay. Fantastic. Okay, so format is going to be, just to remind everyone, I will read the text completely through, mostly uninterrupted, mostly without my little witty glosses, although maybe an occasional witty gloss inserted here and there. And then we will go back through the text and we'll go through it section by section, and I'll take questions and we'll discuss meaning and implications and any kind of additional knowledge I may have about the subject covered in the book. Or we'll just laugh about it because, frankly, some of these stories, I don't think they were meant to be funny, but some of them are just laugh out loud, gut-wrenchingly hysterical. Yeah. Takeda, lovely to see you again. Welcome to my little corner out here on Shincheon in Daegu, South Korea. Yeah, we're outside today. As I was saying at the beginning, for those who weren't there, temperatures have been reaching 100 degrees Fahrenheit as the mercury goes. That's before humidity is accounted for during the day here. And so I've been waking up at about 1:30, getting some work done, and then heading out for a walk to enjoy the cool nighttime air while I can. So we're out here early in the morning, and we'll keep going until it gets too hot and I need to flee back indoors. Okay, so the first uh, reading today is actually very interesting because it is an Irish poem, although we're going to read the translation. I'm not even going to attempt to humiliate myself or insult Irish Gaelic by reading a Gaelic poem to you. The pronunciation rules, the orthography is just too unique. But this is an Irish poem that was written by an Irish monk, an Irish student in Austria in the 7th century. So he's an Irish monk or an Irish student in a monastery in Corinthia, in Corinthia, in Austria. Sorry, the 9th century, and he writes this poem cheekily in Irish in the margins of one of St. Paul's epistles. So we actually have these kind of student glosses in medieval texts all the time, or even just authored glosses where sometimes they'll actually make commentary in the margins of the text, and sometimes they'll just include completely unrelated thoughts or poems or writings in the margins. And so medieval manuscripts are fascinating, not just for the main body of text itself, but for the extras that have been added either originally when the manuscript was copied or composed, and then later on over the centuries as various editors and authors kind of read through and leave their 2 shillings in the margins. And so this is a 9th century English translation of a 9th century Irish poem written originally in Irish by an Irish student in 9th century Austria. So again, focusing heavily hardcore on the internationality of medieval Europe. You didn't just have Irish people living in Ireland. You didn't just have Italians, as we call them now, living in the Italies. People traveled, people lived in different places, people had different experiences of the world. Okay, so once again, format is I will read through the poem once, and then we will go through it bit by bit and discuss, and I'll take questions. Now, for some of you, this poem will be particularly sweet and enjoyable because it is about a student and his white cat. The white cat. I and Pangorban, my cat. 'Tis a like task we are at. Hunting mice is his delight. Hunting words I sit all night. Better far than praise of men, 'tis to sit with book and pen. Pangor bears me no ill will, he too plies his simple skill. 'Tis a merry thing to see, at our tasks how glad are we, when at home we sit and find entertainment to our mind. Oftentimes a mouse will stray in the path of Pangor's way. Oftentimes my keen thought set takes a meaning in its net. 'Gainst the wall he sets his eye, full and fierce and sharp and sly. 'Gainst the wall of knowledge I all my little wisdom try. When a mouse darts from its den, oh, how glad is Pangor then! Oh, what gladness do I prove when I solve the doubts I love. So in peace our task we ply, Pangorban, my cat, and I. In our arts we find our bliss. I have mine, and he has his. Practice every day has made Pangor perfect, perfect in his trade. I get wisdom day and night, turning darkness into light. Pangorban, the white cat. So I wanted to give you some interesting information about the function, the role of cats in the Middle Ages. So it's very clear there seems to be some real affection here between the student and Pangorban. He actually calls him my cat, not just a cat, not just the monastery's cat, his cat. And so it seems that cats probably did actually occupy a pet role, they actually occupied a role of affection and respect, but they were definitely considered a tool. In Italy, there was a preacher, and I have to chase this down a little bit more, but apparently in 14th century Italy, there was a preacher who refused to take up his position until he was guaranteed a cat would be provided to him to protect both his food and his books from the vermin. And of course, probably also to protect himself from being bitten by rats in his sleep. So cats definitely played an essential role in medieval society. And as we can see, this poem is trying to draw is a sort of metaphor. The cat is a metaphor for gaining knowledge, the student's quest for knowledge, and how the cat is honing his skill, which is hunting vermin, mice, and rats, while the student struggles in some cases to turn darkness into light. Yeah, Pangorban, my cat. And so, there's many parallels that are drawn here between hunting mice and hunting words, but between seeking out prey, and seeking out knowledge, and the challenges that both of those face. The metaphor of a mental net to capture knowledge, while of course the cat uses its teeth and its claws and its paws. Right. So what I've just found so fascinating about this is how timeless this poem sounds. It sounds like as though it could have been written today, although less and less with AI basically destroying the human brain and its ability to actually function and retain knowledge on its own. But students who actually still bother to try to attain and secure knowledge in their brain will feel familiar thoughts and emotions represented in the lines of this poem. So yeah, Pangorban literally means the white cat. Ban means white, or actually Pangur is his name, and Ban means white. They're not. I wasn't certain. If any of you speak first millennium Irish Gaelic, Pangur, Pangur, is that a proper name, or does that actually mean cat? I wasn't able. I didn't. I meant to go look that up, and I forgot to. I apologize. Okay. Any questions about Pangorban? Any questions about this lovely little poem? It was something light and easy to start off with, not something overly heavy. We're going to get into more heavy and more detailed material directly. I'll just give you all one last chance to ask any questions about this lovely little poem by an Irish student in the 9th century living and studying in an Austrian monastery. So in the gloss, and this is what I meant by, I've mentioned this before, as more manuscripts are discovered and studied and published, we hope to find more Irish writing in them throughout Europe because of that horrible fire in the archives in Dublin in 1921. And this is a classic case of what was a Latin manuscript containing in the glosses 9th century Irish. Yeah, I just think that speaks to the historian and linguist in me all together. Yeah. Okay. Moving on then to dress sense. So in the 14th century, there is this knight, this puissant warrior, Geoffroy de Charny, and many call him just Charny in the harness fighting community. And he writes this manual of chivalry and combat. And he provides all sorts of details that are sort of tangential to the warrior's life. He's sort of a moralizing tract about how to also comport yourself as a good man at arms. And he sort of occasionally mentions how women should comport themselves as well. And he has sometimes some very pithy things to say about the way in which fashionable knights are dressing, versus the way he thinks they should be dressing. And so in this manual, where we have an excerpt specifically referring to fashion sense, according to Geoffroy de Charny in the 14th century, he says, if anyone is thus elegantly dressed and in good fashion, as befits a young man, it should not be done through pride, nor should our Lord be forgotten, our Lord being Jesus. But be careful not to spruce yourself up so much that you do not remember God. For if you do not remember God, God will not remember you. But one should dress well when in company with other young people, and to fit in with them, of course. And it is a fine and good thing to spend one's youth in honest fashion. And those who spend it thus should praise God all their lives. As for the youth of noble ladies, damsels, and other women of high rank, it can indeed be said that it is fitting to wear fine circlets, coronetals, pearls, precious stones, rings, embroidery, to be beautifully dressed, their heads and bodies well adorned, according to what is right and fitting for each person to do. It is much more suitable for them to wear fine adornments than for men. For young damsels sometimes achieve better marriages when they are seen in rich apparel that suits them. These rich ornaments should be left to them, noble ladies and damsels, for those who have the will to rise to great achievement. How can they better adorn themselves than by being equipped for it by all good qualities? They can do so by being men of worth, wise, loyal, without arrogance, joyful, generous, courteous, expert, bold, and active. Right. Okay. So We're going to go through this section by section because there are so many rich details and statements that really do relate to mores of this era and also social norms of this era. And so we're going to delve into those a little bit. So the first thing you may have noticed that God is mentioned a lot. And for all of its luxury, the Middle Ages was absolutely a time of devout faith in the Judeo-Christian God, and certainly in Jesus, our Lord, right? So it is very important to keep that in mind when you're reading these texts. And here specifically, Charny is calling to the virtue of humility, of modesty, and that even though you should dress elegantly, and you should, he says, you should balance that with the virtue of humility, which is, it's interesting. He doesn't provide very specific details about how that balance can be maintained. Because in our minds, our modern minds especially, we think, well, if you're dressed in ornate clothing and ornate jewelry, then how can that possibly be modest? Should you then not have forgotten God in doing so? But Charny insists that it is possible to dress well. He says, if anyone is thus elegantly dressed and in good fashion, as befits a young man, it should not be done through pride, nor should our Lord be forgotten. So you should dress well, but not in a prideful manner. Now, I personally, I don't know about you, I would prefer some more specific instructions than this very nebulous, open to interpretation of dress yourself as befits you, but also not pridefully, but also ornately and fashionably, but also don't forget about God. It's a very interesting combination there. And I'm just going to let everyone know that there is probably, if you've been leaving comments, the last comment I have was from Susan a while ago about Pangorban sounding perfectly adorable. So there is very clearly a lag in the comments. So I will get back to them as they appear. In any case, so he keeps, emphasizing this idea about honest fashion, without actually saying what honest fashion is. But we can get some clues about honest fashion in some of the other texts that are contemporary to this in the later part of the 14th century, because Charny is writing really in the end of the 14th century. So basically, honest would mean in line with your status, and he mentions that. In line with your rank, with your station, and that is in part defined by sumptuary laws. And we have discussed sumptuary laws in many of my medieval sewing parties, and of course also in some of our medieval story times. Sumptuary comes from the word sumptus, luxury, and that refers not just to the luxury items of clothing, but also to food and to equipment, and in some cases to land, into furniture, furnishings that you are allowed to own as a person. And we start to see these sort of sumptuary laws cropping up in the 12th century is the earliest one, I think, of which I'm aware, in Western Europe. And then they appear increasingly as the centuries wear on, as the gap between, the wealth gap between merchant and peasant and nobility gets smaller and smaller, and the merchants and yea, even the peasants who are gaining wealth start attiring themselves as members of the nobility would. And so those sorts of sumptuary laws, those expectations are definitely play into this idea of honest fashion, honest to your station in life, to your rank. But that also means to dress also up to your station. So there's an expectation that if you are a duke or a royal peer of some other rank, you should dress like that. You should not go about in rags unless you're engaging in some sort of extreme act of penance. See Henry II. But that's what honest means. Honest in this case is not a moral judgment in terms of somehow clothing is deceitful and dishonest. And yet I say that, and yet it is, because you want to dress in a way that is honest to your station, that gives a visual cue as to your station in life. For a woman's status was based on your father if unmarried and husband is married, but a widow would she take her late husband's. Yeah, so status is an interesting. Women's status is not this is not it's not uniform across the Middle Ages, nor is it uniform across Europe. You really have to look at where and when in medieval Europe, because that shifts as the Middle Ages wear on. If we call the Middle Ages the time between the end of the Western Roman Empire, sort of the Justinian plague, up until, say, 1500, that changes, and which part of your family defines your rank does also change. So, for example, Jacquetta of Luxembourg, she was a princess of Luxembourg. She was of the House of Duchy of Luxembourg. She was the daughter of the Duke Regnant of Luxembourg, right? She came from a very powerful house. And in her first marriage, she married an English royal peer. But in her second marriage, she married basically a commoner, a Woodville. So her her status was this weird mixed status, because she was basically defined more or less. She was treated with the respect of being the widow of a royal peer of England and a princess in her own right, but also she kind of lowered herself by voluntarily marrying Anthony Woodville, right? So so yeah, it really depends on when and where. Most widows, though, widows tend to be defined by their last husband status, as far as I can tell, in most of the places throughout Europe. And there's even, I recently read, it was one of the chronicles that we'll be reading in a future medieval story time, from the Duchy of Burgundy, and I don't think we got to it yet, talking about the Feast of the Pheasant and how the Duke of Burgundy, his sister has, or his cousin has married below the rank at which she was born. And so she's actually placed lower in the rank in the hall of the Feast of the Pheasant. And not the Feast of the Pheasant, sorry, I think this is Margaret of York's wedding feast. Either way, one of those two feasts. Philip the Good goes and fetches her and brings her to his table. And he actually says, he's recorded as saying, "You have sat long enough at this lower rank. Now you shall sit as my cousin." Right. And so even in the 15th century, for instance, there is this slight confusion about where a woman should be on the hierarchy based on her place of birth, based on her most recent marriage, based on a previous more higher ranking marriage. Yeah. And so different polities actually come up with ordinances to define that. So you really have to look at the order of precedence ordinances for the specific polity. Burgundy was a massive bureaucratic machine. The Burgundian state was hyper organized, and it was hyper regulated. And I'd be interested to see if those ordinances survived. I think they did. I'll have to go see if the ordinances survived from either Philip the Good's reign or Charles the Bold's reign about the order of precedence. They're super complicated. Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that, Susan. Okay, so interesting. Charny also has a double standard about what's suitable for women to wear versus what's suitable for men to wear. I'm going to read this passage again, and I'm going to tell you what I think it actually implies. "As for the youth of noble ladies, damsels, and other women of high rank, it can indeed be said that it is fitting to wear fine circlets, coronetals, pearls, precious stones, rings, embroidery, to be beautifully dressed, their heads and bodies well adorned, according to what is right and fitting for each person to do so. And it is much more suitable for them to wear fine adornments than for men. For young damsels sometimes achieve better marriages when they are seen in rich apparel that suits them." So there's a couple of things here. He's emphasizing that it's acceptable and even approbable for women to wear precious stones and rings, embroidery, to be ornately dressed. I'm pretty certain that the word beautifully dressed could also be translated as ornately. The implication of that being that Charny does not think that probably men should be dressing similarly, with rich stones and rich embroidery and coronetals and circlets and pearls. But If you look at the expense accounts and inventories for the menfolk of the 14th and early 15th century, you will see that they were dressed just as ornately as the women. Their clothes are often adorned in rich embroidery and gems and pearls, and they sometimes also wear circlets, and they adorn themselves with fine items and fine accessories as the women are wont to do. But Charny thinks men should not do that, interestingly, is what he is implying here. But it's interesting how he also makes an exception for dressing above one's station for women. And it's actually a very pragmatic approach. And it shows that he understood at some level the situation that women in his era faced in the 14th and 15th century and other centuries throughout history have faced. And that is to find a way to succeed in life, to not die in penury, to rise above their station when the options for doing so were relatively limited. In the 14th century, women could rise above their station by joining a monastic community, but usually to join the monastic community, they would actually need some kind of dowry. So they would actually need to start off in a relatively decent financial position. So that may or may not be a way for them to actually climb the socioeconomic ladder, but it could if they had enough seed money, as it were, in the form of a dowry to join the monastic community. Or they could marry well. And yes, there are some options for pursuing a trade. There were certain trades that were acceptable for women. Silk working is one of them. And we do know in 15th century London, for instance, the names of some women who actually had their own businesses and became wealthy and influential on their own beyond the confines of their also successful marriages. But that brings us to the most likely option for most women, and that was to achieve a good marriage. And Charny is actually condoning women dressing above their honest station, meaning beyond what would be normally socially acceptable for their rank, their status, women of their status to wear. Because by dressing better than they are, socioeconomically speaking, they can achieve a better marriage. So by putting on a pretty packaging, they can improve their station in life. And he approves of that. And I have to say, that's a remarkably progressive view for a 14th century knight. I really have to say I was impressed when I read that. Yeah. Yeah, there's also this thought about this implication that how you appear on the outside is in part how you appear on the inside, right? And that's a moral, that's a moray that is not just European, that is 100% Asian as well, especially in Confucianism and Neo-Confucianism. How you appear on the outside reflects your inner morality is 100% an Asian idea. So that's an idea that seems to span the Eurasian continent. So yes, if you are a knight according to Charny in the 14th, and his treatise continues to be copied and read into the 15th century, then you should adorn yourselves well, especially as a young man. You should adorn yourself like a dapper young man. But do not do so pridefully and do so honestly, but also do not do so ornately in the manner of women, which means that, of course, many were. Otherwise, he wouldn't feel the need to make that stipulation, I don't think. Okay, questions or comments about Geoffroy de Charny's dress sense? Okay. And again, it seems that there might be a lag in the comments, so I will press onward and then I will go back to any comments or questions that appear late in my feed versus when you submit them. Okay, so everyone, during my live stream Getting Dressed that I did several weeks ago at this point at the Great Fair of Penzig, I read you the tale of the miracle of the testicles. But I don't think that many of you were there. Would let me know if you would like me to reprise the miracle of the testicles, a 7th century tale of miracle wrought by a martyr in the great city of Constantinople. While I let you respond to that, whether you would like to hear the miracle of the testicles, we shall move on to the tale of the ugly feet. This is a wonderful tale from a medieval Norse saga, the saga of Saint Olaf. And it is a tale that talks about aesthetic values of the era, but also it shows how people traveled, right? Please reprise. Okay, we will get back to the miracle of the testicles. I missed it the first time. Absolutely. Great. Okay, so first we'll do, I guess this is all going to be about ugly body parts for the next two readings. We've got Tale of the Ugly Feet, and then we'll go back to the miracle of the testicles. Okay, so this tale from the saga of Saint Olaf is interesting because it also underscores the internationality of the medieval world and how people did definitely travel and spend time in other spaces and other geographies and other cultures. Right. There was a man called Toraren Nevjolsson, excuse me, Nevjolsson, Icelandic. He was an Icelander, not of great family, but he was wise and clever of speech and bold in talk with princes. He was a great traveler and was abroad for long stretches of time. Toraren was an ugly man, and especially so because he was ill-shaped in his limbs. He had great ugly hands, but his feet were very much uglier. King Olav had Toraren as a guest for some days and talked much with him. Toraren slept in the king's room. Early one morning, the king lay awake, but the other men in the room were asleep. The sun had just risen, and there was much light within. The king saw that Toraren had stretched 1 foot forth from the bedclothes. He looked at the foot for a time. Then everyone in the room gradually awoke. After they had all done so, the king said to Toraren, "I have been awake some time, and I have seen a sight which seems of great worth. It is a man's foot, so ugly that I believe there will not be an uglier one in the whole town." And he bade the others look and see whether it seemed the same to them. And all who saw the foot truly said that it was so. Toraren understood then what they were talking about and answered in his forthright manner. "There are few things so odd that you cannot expect to find the like to them, and all the like to them, and it is most likely that it is so now." The king said, "I will not hold with it that you can find so ugly a foot, even if I should bet on it." Then Toraren answered, "I am ready to bet you that here in this house I can find an uglier foot." The king said, "Then shall the one of us who is right crave a boon of the other." "So shall it be," said Toraren, and he stuck forth from the bedclothes his other foot. And it was no whit fairer, and the big toe was off as well. Then said Toraren, "Look here, O king, at another foot, which is so much uglier as it is missing a toe. I have won the bet." And thus should kings be ever ware of ugly feet and their owners. I need to go find the rest of this to see what boon Toraren what demanded of such a foolish king as to take such a foolish bet. For surely if one foot is ugly, the other is unlikely to be better. Okay, so there's some interesting details that this tale provides other than the thought of ugly feet, missing toes, and ugly hands, and ugly limbs in general. It's the social structure of the court. And this is Norway. This is the king of Norway, King Olaf. Right? And so what's interesting is the sleeping arrangements. And this is a kind of situation that happens in most of medieval Europe across most of the Middle Ages. So you have King Olav sleeping, and not only is Turarin sleeping in the king's room, but so are many other people, many other of the king's men. And this is, I know some of you with a modern eye are going to look at this and question what that might mean about King Olav's sexuality. No, no, no. It's got nothing to do with sexuality. It was simply the case that the king or the queen slept with their closest retainers and their servants, especially this one, which I think this saga was written down in the 13th century, but it documents earlier history. And so the earlier you go in the Middle Ages, the more you have communal sleeping arrangements like this. And the less and less, to the point of not at all, do you have private chambers. So you've got the king, who's probably in a nice comfy bed. And actually there are some extant beds from the end of the first millennium that have been excavated in Norway and Sweden that are just, oh my God, stunning. They make my rope bed at Penzig look like a peasant's furnishing. And so you've got this idea that, one, the king awakens early, but he lays awake while the other men are asleep. The sun had just risen, and there's a comment here about the light. There was much light within. And that's to tell the reader that it's light enough that finally the king can see, because otherwise at nighttime, it's pitch black in the Middle Ages in Europe. Most places in Europe, if it's winter anyway, and it's nighttime, it's pitch black. There is no light. There's no ambient light. There's no street lights. There's no city lights from afar casting some kind of glow. It is dark, dark, which is honestly why so many of these crazy, zany stories from the Middle Ages and have these crazy plot lines, mixed up identity, confused identity, people bumping into each other and not knowing who they are. That's because it was dark. So the comment here that the sun had just risen and there was much light within is so that the reader, the listener, because this would have been probably sung actually originally, the listener can imagine that the room is now bright enough so that the king can fully admire the horror of the ugly foot. But the idea that the king literally pondered this ugly foot for such a long time is also very interesting. One wonders what the king was pondering, if he in his mind there was this stream of conscious conversation with himself about how the foot represents the fleeting nature of beauty or something like that, because otherwise or if it was really just so hideous that he was captivated by it in the very unpleasant sense of that word. Yeah. So yes, the tale of the ugly foot. Turarin Nevjovsson. Oh my God, Icelandic is so hard, and I know I'm probably not even pronouncing that even vaguely correctly. Have you played or seen Kingdom Come Deliverance? I have seen Kingdom Come Deliverance. I have actually reviewed, I did a whole live stream criticizing violently the fashion from Kingdom Come Deliverance, and Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is kind of only slightly better. I don't really enjoy playing video games. I feel like it's a waste of my life, which is not a judgment on any of you. If you enjoy video games, good for you. I just feel like I need to be producing things and creating things, not just playing games. There are actually very few games I like to play. I mostly like to be dancing or sewing or learning something or crafting or creating beauty I just prefer to be active in general. Yeah, that's an interesting question though. Let me look back and see if I've missed any comments. Okay. Any questions about Turarin's hideous foot? Otherwise, we are going to go back to the miracle of the testicles. The miracle of the testicles. So, this is actually a mid-7th century miracle tale from Constantinople. In the mid-7th century, Stephen, a deacon of the Hagia Sophia, the great church of Constantinople, which is now once again, regrettably, an active mosque instead of being a museum to all faiths, related how he was miraculously cured by Saint Artemios, whose shrine in the region of Oxea was famous for the treatment of male genital disorders. Yeah, Yeah, Tota, they should bring me on board as a consultant. Before I jump into the testicles, I'll answer that question. Yeah, they did a better job in Kingdom Come Deliverance too, but only slightly. And in some cases, they definitely got way worse. Way worse. There's a lot of women wandering around with no smocks on. That's with dresses with breasts almost falling out of their lace-up girdles. Anyway, so format for everyone who wasn't here to explain the format. I will do a complete read through, and then I will get back to the comments and we'll discuss and answer questions. So here we are. Stephen and his male genital disorder, and the miracle that Saint Artemius wrought. In my testicles, said Stephen, I suffered a rupture, whether from shouting acclamations or from a heavy weight, I cannot really say. This happened to me a short time before Heraclius of blessed memory died, circa 641, and out of shame, I concealed myself for a considerable time. I watched carefully for a chance to bathe alone in the small hours, not wishing anyone to see my shame. At long last, I disclosed the misfortune to my parents, and after many treatments, oh, how many, had been performed on me, finally, after taking counsel with them, I entrusted myself for surgery to the surgeons in the hospital of Samson. And I went there and reclined in the hospital room near the entrance to the area devoted to eyes. After I had been treated all over for 3 nights and days with cold cauteries, surgery was performed on the 4th day. I will omit what horrible things I experienced while on my back. To sum it all up, I state that I actually despaired of life itself at the hands of the physicians. After God, entreated by the tears of my parents, restored my life to me, and after the scar from the incision and the cautery had healed, and just as I was believing that I was once again healthy, a short time later, the same condition recurred, and so I reverted to my former state. But I devised a plan to approach the holy martyr, Saint Artemius, as I had heard of his many great miracles. Still, I was unwilling to wait in the venerable church, feeling ashamed before friends and acquaintances to be seen in such a condition. But I frequently used to pass by, for at the time I was staying at the Oxea, and so I descended to the holy tomb of his precious relics, and I cast some of his holy blessing, i.e. the oil, on my testicles, hoping to procure a cure in this manner. And frequently I entreated him to deliver me from the troublesome condition. After descending to the holy tomb, I found the doors in front open. I was astounded that they were open at such an hour. This was during the time, this must have been the doing of the martyr in his desire to pity me. Stretching out face down on the holy coffin, I straddled it, and thus contrived to rub the corner of the same holy tomb on the spot where I was ailing. And with tears, I spoke again to the martyr, "O Saint Artemius, by God who has given you the gift of cures, no doctor on earth will ever touch me again. So if you please, cure me. But if not, to your everlasting shame, I will live thus without a cure." And after some days, I went to the bath in the quarter of Anthemios, the one called Libanon, to bathe by myself at dawn in order not to be seen by anyone. And entering the hot chamber, I noticed that I still had the injury. But upon exiting, I had no injury. And recognizing the act of kindness on the part of God and the martyr which had befallen me, in thanksgiving, I do now glorify them, proclaiming their deeds of greatness throughout my whole life. The miracle of the testicles. So, no, this is not the back of a Bible. We are reading today from a medieval miscellany, a fantastic selection edited and put together by Judith Herren, or Judith Herren, I don't know if she's German or not, of texts from various parts of medieval Europe, from various eras of medieval Europe on a wide array of topics. So, I'm now going to share with you all some visuals that may help you imagine what it is this man went through. So here we have a 16th century depiction of surgery of a scrotal hernia. And you can see that when he said, "I reclined," he meant it literally. It's actually, the table is actually reclined backwards so that the blood rushes to your head and away from your limbs. And this is going to actually minimize bleeding. But there's also something I would like you to focus your attention on specifically, is this little table by the little table, by the big table, by the surgery table, by the gurney, as it were. What do you think that little table is? Right? Can any of you guess what that little table is? Yeah, I've had some interesting. They've had some interesting things there. Wow, truly God's work, right? It is amazing how these texts survive. Yeah, it really is. It seriously is. Considering the number of fires that have happened over the centuries, accidental and intentional, the number of wars that have resulted in texts being looted and ending up in private libraries, it is remarkable, especially since this is a 7th century text. Right? So yeah, so does anyone know what that table is? So this horrifying little table, I had someone guessed that this was spare parts. It is not spare parts from the surgery. This is a cautery table, and those are cautery irons. And so when incisions were made, afterwards they were cauterized shut. So they were burnt shut. More often than, sometimes they were stitched. Very often, though, they were cauterized. I actually don't necessarily have much evidence of stitches in this era. I have lots of evidence of cauterization. So those are cautery irons, and he talks about cold cauteries, and I'm not actually certain. I keep meaning to look at what a cold cautery is. So if you know what a cold cautery is in the 7th century, let me know. It is definitely not, it is not some kind of modern chemical. So there's some interesting things here, sort of ancillary to the text. First off, I'm going to focus on the elephant in the room, which is the way that this man basically blackmailed the saint into healing him, because he actually goes into this saint's tomb and he gets on top of the coffin, the sarcophagus, and he starts rubbing his groin against the sarcophagus. And he actually, there's a threat here. At least I interpret this as a threat, because he says, "So if you please, cure me. But if not, to your everlasting shame, I will live thus without a cure." And I really do imagine that he means, I'm going to stay here in this tomb, rubbing myself on this sarcophagus until you heal me. Yeah. So that's a very interesting image, which is why I know this is meant to be a serious martyr's tale, but I can't help but laugh at some of the imagery here. I mean, I get that a scrotal hernia, which is maybe what this probably is, especially because he says he doesn't know if he got it from acclamation, from shouting, or from lifting something too heavy, and usually that's what leads to a hernia. The scrotal hernia, it's serious, and I really do feel sorry for his pain, but also he's sitting there dry humping this saint's sarcophagus, basically. Question, Laurie, welcome. We still use cauterization in surgery today. Yes, indeed we do, although thankfully, it's no longer a big piece of, it's much more precision cauterization is today than it used to be. Did that reduce the rate of infection? Yes. Well, not only did it reduce the rate of infection, it would also close the wound up, would close the incision up. So for certain, from that perspective, it would reduce the rate of infection, but also only if the conditions under which the surgery were performed itself were initially clean, because otherwise you're just sealing in all of that bacteria, all of the deleterious microbes inside the wound. But it would also stop the bleeding, which is very important. Stopping bleeding, very important in an era when they didn't have blood transfusions. Yeah. Let me see. Was that because it was more hygienic, less infectious deaths? The cauterization, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The cauterization would absolutely create a more oh wait, sorry, cosmic. Was that because, are you referring to the cauterization or are you referring to the table that's inverted? Yeah, let me know specifically to what you're referring there. Is it holding instruments? Yes, Stephanie, it's holding the cautery instruments, the cauterization irons, as they were. Rubbing does work. Yeah. Yeah. So cosmic, let me know if you were referring to, the hygiene from the position of the table or from the cauterization or from the cauterization table. I'm pretty certain those are just cautery irons. Those don't look like scalpels or anything like that. So I don't think they had the thought yet to sterilize instruments in that way, but we do know that at least by the 15th century, and no doubt earlier, that people had an understanding that boiling things in water sterilized them. They didn't necessarily understand why it worked, but they knew that boiling things for a period of time in water sterilized them. Equipment, pots, pans, dishes, they knew it cleaned them. They also knew that scrubbing things with salt sterilized them and made them cleaner and more hygienic. And they also understood that subjecting implements and tools and equipment, dishes, etc., to UV light, to the sunlight, also had a disinfectant effect. So they might not have understood why it worked, but they understood that there was a correlation between items sterilized through salt and boiling water and sunlight and better outcomes. So it wouldn't surprise me if scalpels and other instruments used for surgery were subjected to those treatments. And something in my memory is triggering over the last couple of months in some texts that I've read from the Middle Ages, primary source text. There is a mention about boiling implements to make them clean and good for use. Good for use. Yeah, I was thinking the cauterization. I think it's fascinating that people intuited these things before germ theory, right? Yeah. Humans, I have to say, have shown over the eons. It's our curiosity that has really allowed us to thrive and to grow as a species, honestly. It's that, and also our ability to reason, to look at two things happening simultaneously and draw the correlation and then expound upon that to causation, to apply the technique to our benefit. Yeah, it's interesting. So they did have miasma theory. And miasma theory is definitely, I feel like that's a precursor to germ theory, even though they didn't understand the microscopic level. They understood about miasma, about the idea of foul air. And if you think about to a pre-microscopy world, the idea of miasma really is basically the understanding of there being something foul and evil in the air, for instance, that causes major issues. And they also understood about foul water, and they did understand that foul water would cause big problems, which is why many recipes, many instructions for various sorts of techniques throughout the Middle Ages call for rainwater or for freshly flowing river water, but not stagnant water, to avoid the stagnant water for using for cooking, for making things, for producing items, right? So yeah, it is fascinating. I agree. Yeah, and the humors are definitely, what was disease theory back then? Bad ether. Yeah, so toda, so ether would be one of the five elements. um, which certainly ties into humoral theory 100%. But yeah, disease theory there's a combination of things. There was humoral theory, which is that there are four humors contained within the body, and there are also the tempers, and so you need to keep these humors balanced. And that disease was basically there was an imbalance, a distemper. Literally means an imbalance in your humors. And humoral theory is 100% the foundation of Chinese medicine as well. So humoral theory, starts in the ancient times across Eurasia, and goes all the way from Western Europe in the Roman Empire all the way to Korea. modern day Korea, which at that point would have been a variety of kingdoms and everything in between. So humoral theory lasted for a very long time. And there was also, theories about miasmas, and something foul in this bad air causing disease. They assumed that the thing that actually caused the disease ultimately was that the miasma led to an imbalance, and therefore if you could find a way to balance the humors depending on the symptoms, then you could restore health. Of course, in many cases, the herbs that they were using to try to restore balance to the humors did in fact have powerful active ingredients and would often lead to recovery. It's just a coincidence that, that it worked with the humoral theory, but it was, really obviously the active ingredients, the actives in the herbs that actually led to the recovery. And sometimes that just lined up with the humoral theory. Yeah. Trat, you just answered my question. Oh, sorry. If you drop through time in the 7th century, how long would you survive? In the 7th century, depends on where, right? So remember, 7th century is not the same depending on where you are. 7th century Constantinople, as we find in this text, is super sophisticated. They have hospitals with complicated, sophisticated surgery being conducted, cauterization to close wounds. They've got bathhouses all over the place that operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because he talks about waiting until no one is there to go to the bath, which means that the bathhouse is still open at a time when no one else is there. So Constantinople, the roads are paved, they've got plumbing. I could probably survive pretty well in 7th century Constantinople. Unless, of course, I get a paper cut or a paper cut, a small cut, and die of some bacterial infection because it's a prebiotic era. Yeah, honestly, that's the thing that worries me the most about most pre-modern places. It's that they don't have antibiotics. Yeah. Yeah. Let me see. Hold on a minute. I watched a documentary on Tudor England where they said something like 80% of people's caloric intakes was bread and beer. I'm curious, how often did people drink straight water? So again, that question, that's going to depend on where you are in Europe. But for the most part, yeah, people were drinking what's called small beer, which is very different from the beer you're going to get these days. Small beer is a second brewing, and it is minimally alcoholic. It's just alcoholic enough to make it to take care of any deleterious microbiota in the water. And they also drank severely diluted wine. So yeah, it does seem that there isn't much of an incidence of pure water drinking. There's a lot of concoctions and tisanes that people are drinking in this era for health reasons or for other reasons. So yeah, it's kind of hard to tell what percentage per se. It's hard to tell what percentage per se, but it does seem based on the text that in most of Europe, drinking highly diluted beer or wine was the common practice. Yeah. So yeah. Live streaming, YouTube. YouTube. Yeah, 네.
어느 나라예요?
네.
어느 나라?
음?
어디 샀어? 어느 나라 갔겠다는 보자.
몰라요. Medieval Europe? Middle Ages, Renaissance?
어느 나라인가 그걸 내가 영어를 못하니까. How old are you? 나이는? How old are you?
Oh, 45. 45.
45.
Mhm.
45. 한국은 언제 왔어?
조금만 해요. 네.
한국에 언제 왔어? 내가 모르지. 어째 본? 어디서 태어났나?
I'm trying to think how to answer that question. Where was I born?
예?
Again?
어제 본?
미국 사람이에요.
미국?
네.
미국 어디?
네, Delaware.
어?
Delaware.
젤로에?
Delaware.
젤로에는
A small state.
미국이야.
네, 네, 미국 사람.
혼자 지금 혼자 온 거야? 한국에 혼자 왔어?
Um, I'm trying to think. 네, yeah, I've been here in Daegu.
어.
Yeah.
이 유튜브 하면 미국으로 가는 거예요?
Whole world.
전 세계 다
Yeah,
나가?
everywhere. Yeah. Yeah.
수고 많아요.
No, 감사합니다. Oh, thank you for that compliment. Sorry. Let me check here. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Where in medieval Europe were you most likely to survive childbirth? Oh, Jesus. That's a terrible question. I don't know. Probably Spain. For most of the medieval period, you were probably, sorry about that interruption, everyone. It happens when you live stream in public. I have real problems with the Daegu accent. It's really hard for me to understand. Yeah, especially men. Most of my friends are women and they speak differently, so the accent is different. I have real problems understanding the Daegu accent. Right. So where were you most likely to survive childbirth? Is probably Spain, I would say. Spain, and in Sicily when it was still controlled, when it was, under, the very erudite court of Frederick II. Most likely in the Mediterranean, you were most likely to survive childbirth, I would say. Spain above all, because they had really advanced medicine, especially in the Moorish kingdoms. And then even as the Reconquista proceeded onward, all of those very learned physicians generally continued to reside in those courts. It wasn't until their expulsion by those idiots, Ferdinand and Isabella, who basically cursed Spain to poverty and ignorance, by evicting their Jewish and Muslim populations. So up until that point, I would say Spain is probably where you're most likely to survive childbirth. Yeah, but it's not even the childbirth was dangerous, but it's the childbed sickness that would generally get you. Yeah, no, thank you. Okay. Any other questions about the miracle of the testicles and life in Constantinople in the 7th century? Yeah, so this story really takes place at the height of the 7th century, and so the height of Constantinople, right, as a city. It's sort of after this is when the Arab conquest of, well, the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, and all of Northern Africa and Spain starts, and that starts the decline for Constantinople. Honestly, although it takes a long time. By the time Constantinople finally falls in 1453, it's a shadow, an absolute ghost town, really, and a ghost of its former self, for certain. How did you get into European medical history? Does it have a correlation with American history in the same period? There is, so American history in the period of the Middle Ages would be the history of the peoples who lived there. So the various first peoples, the first wave of humans to come across and to settle there, what many people call Native Americans now. And no, there's no relationship. So remember, Europeans didn't get to the Americas until really in any kind of numbers anyway, until the end of the 15th century. Yes, we had some settlements on the east coast of Canada, not modern day Canada, and Greenland, but in terms of actual quantity, we didn't really start making an impact here until the end of the 15th century. And even then, that wasn't North America, that was the Caribbean and Central and Latin America. So yeah, in this period that we're talking about, American history is kind of much harder to track because there's much less written. Very, very little in the way of written histories for most of the Americas, for most of the period of human habitation there. And then the written histories that we did have ended up getting purposefully destroyed during the conquest, during the Spanish colonial period. Yeah, good times. Yeah. So I would just like to remind everyone that as an American of European heritage, my history is also medieval history. right? My history didn't just start in 1620 with the arrival of the Mayflower or 1607 with the Jamestown colony, right? My ancestors go back before then. So medieval history is also part of America's history. Some people need to be reminded of that. And how did I get into medical history? I get into all of the history. So for me, history should be taken as a whole. You should not, I mean, you can focus with particular interest on a particular aspect, but you can't understand medical history if you don't understand social history, if you don't understand military history. You can't even really understand it if you don't understand fashion history, because all of these histories happen together at the same time as part of an organic whole. So I'm interested in medical history insofar as it influences daily life in any given period. You can't understand daily life in any given period of history if you don't understand basic medical practices. But I mean, just like today, I have some understanding of modern medicine and some understanding of the science that underlies modern medicine, the chemistry, the biology, the physics, etc. But I'm not an expert. So I couldn't, it's been a while since I've studied neurology, neurobiology. So I need a refresher. Medieval people also had various understandings of medicine and medical theory. So, but, I think that to understand any given history, you need to understand the other histories that go alongside of it. Yeah. Great question, Alan. Thank you for asking that. Appreciate it. Okay, did I miss any other questions before we go on? Okay, so the next thing I have for you is somewhat medically related and highly disturbing. Oh, I hope my little bookmark didn't fall out. I think that might have been the bookmark that fell out. Let me see if I can find it again. So there is, some of you might be aware that piracy is not a new concept, and that pirates have been plying the oceans as long as we've been probably on ships, and as long as there have been ships with goods on them worth stealing, or as long as there have been towns with goods, coastal towns with goods in them worth raiding. Here it is. So the idea, the Pirates of the Caribbean nonsense is, that's, first off, that's not really how pirates, even in the golden era of piracy, dressed. I'm just going to lead off with that. But anyway, piracy has been around since forever. And pirates, one man's pirate is another man's privateer, is another man's merchant marine. So the definition of piracy is definitely from the perspective of the person receiving the act of piracy, I would say. Pirates, though, have always been really clever. They've been very clever people. And so we're going to actually journey very far east for our next selection. And that's what I love about this book, A Medieval Miscellany, is that it's not just text from European medieval history. It's got text from Eastern Asia as well, from other parts of the world, from India. And so we are going to go to the east, and we are going to actually take up the journeys of Marco Polo, right? And so this isn't, I know you're going to say, well, that's not a text from the East, but it's a text about the East. And it is absolutely certain that Marco Polo actually did exist. He did, in fact, go to the East. Some of the things he wrote about, he did steal from earlier travelogues, but some of the things he absolutely observed. And so this is a text that talks about their visiting the Great Khan in China and the things they learned while they were there. And it talks about some practices that pirates in that part of the world had in order to make sure that they were not cheated of their booty by the people whose goods they pirated. So, again, the format is I shall read the whole text and then we shall take questions and I will look back through the comments. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Christine. So here we go. It's short, so fear not. There'll be plenty of time for us to chat about it. So this text basically relates to the situation in China from roughly between 1260 and 1295. So Marco Polo tells us, you must know that from Malabar and from the neighboring province called Gujarat, more than 100 ships cruise out every year as corsairs, seizing other ships and robbing the merchants, for they are pirates on a major scale. I assure you that they bring their wives and little children with them. They spend the whole summer on a cruise and work havoc amongst the merchants. Gujarat, likewise, is a great kingdom. The people are idolaters and have a king, and a language of their own, and pay tribute to none. The country lies towards the west. Here, the pole star is still more clearly visible, with an apparent altitude of 6 cubits. In this kingdom are the most errant corsairs in the world. Let me tell you one of their nasty tricks. You must know that when they capture merchants, they make them drink tamarind and seawater so that they pass or vomit up all the contents of their stomachs. Then the corsairs collect all that they have cast up and rummage through it to see if it contains any pearls or precious stones. For the corsairs say that when the merchants are captured, they swallow their pearls and other gems to prevent their discovery. That is why they do not scruple to treat them with this drink. So maybe I should have let a trigger warning, possibly disgusting. Content of a possibly disturbing and literally disgusting nature is to follow. Yeah. So, where is Gujarat, you mean? I think if I recall correctly that Gujarat is an Indian kingdom, but I could be wrong about that. I didn't look that up. But it is certainly somewhere there in the Indian Ocean, I think. It certainly sounds like an Indian word anyway. Okay. Cheated off their booty. Damn, I've been on the internet for too long for it took me a while to get it. Wow. Okay, so here we have this. There's so many details here. One, an acknowledgement, even in the 13th century, that merchant marines, merchant vessels out there sailing, when they swallow precious items that are swallowable to protect them from getting stolen if they are raided. And apparently, the pirates were clever enough to have devised a emetic that would actually cause them to vomit up these items. And that emetic is a combination of tamarind, which I love, by the way. Tamarind is nature's Sour Patch Kids. I can eat tamarind all day. But mixing it with seawater is probably what really does the trick. Mixing tamarind with seawater and then forcing them to drink it. That would definitely cause vomiting. And that the corsairs then actually rummage through the contents of their stomachs that have been thus regurgitated to seek for precious items such as pearls and gems. So that's a little disturbing. But also, I guess, if you find yourself having accidentally swallowed something poisonous or toxic and you need to regurgitate it and you happen to have some tamarind, mix it with salt water to make an emergency emetic. The tamarind might make it more palatable, I guess. The salt content of the seawater the mineral content will definitely trigger the vomiting. Tamarind shouldn't itself, though. I literally eat tamarind whole, unsweetened, with no problems all the time. Yeah, so there's that. Another interesting thing is that according to Marco Polo, these corsairs, these pirates, actually go out with their families, their wives, and their children. They spend the whole summer on their ships together. And it's hard to know if that's true or not. I'd have to corroborate that against contemporary sources in other parts of the world, in that part of the world specifically, there in the Indian Ocean and in Eastern Asia or even Southern Asia, to know whether that's true or not. But that's an interesting detail that the family that pirates together stays together. There's something sweet about that. And he specifically mentions that they bring their wives and their little children. The idea being, the implication there just occurred to me. He specifies the little children. because honestly, not little children, so children 7 and up would have been, that's the age of labor, that's the age of going and apprenticing. So it would not be unusual, therefore, to see children 7 and up on ships working, but little children, by a European idea, is unusual. That's why he mentions it here. But they apparently brought their whole families with them to, go adventuring and force merchants to regurgitate the contents of their stomach. Let's see. Medical PSA. Sometimes it's better not to throw up when you ingest something toxic. Oh, yeah. I mean, for certain, absolutely. Depends on the thing. You should always call a poison center if you have one, but sometimes those aren't the circumstances in which we find ourselves. And in case you didn't know, there are poison centers, and you can call them depending on where you are in the world. Hopefully you have internet, because it used to be that those kinds of numbers were contained in phone books, but those don't exist anymore. So yeah, no, you're right. Sometimes it's better not to throw up when you ingest something toxic. You're absolutely right. Tamarind is delicious in small doses. So gross though to go through. Yeah, I agree. I don't think I'd want. Yeah, I agree with you, Huss. Medieval TSA screening. Okay. Thank you, beloved. So on the western coast of India, Gujarat. I thought it sounded very Indian. Contessa, salute. Salute, YouTube. YouTube. Nice. They eat their pearls, then make them puke. That's crazy. No, host. No. So what happens is the merchants eat they swallow their precious items, the way people smuggle things into places like prison and foreign countries now, right? Smuggle in contraband, like drugs now. They would swallow gems and precious stones and precious items that were swallowable. And then they would keep an eye for them to come out on the other end. Or if they got back quickly enough to a place of safety, would regurgitate them. No, the merchants would choose to swallow them. The pirates, knowing that merchants would swallow precious items in anticipation of being boarded, would then give them this emetic of tamarind and seawater and, yeah, make them vomit it up again. Yeah. Let me see. I recently completed a dissertation on the history of jazz, which was related to slavery in the period from the Romans. What were the pirates' musical interests, if any? That is, a very interesting question. So the text I've read about life on these ships is that, pirates or not, there was always at least a couple of sailors, if not multiple of them, who could play a basic instrument and would bring the instruments with them and would engage in musical entertainment when, there wasn't something else pressing happening. The Mary Rose, for instance, is a shipwreck from the 1840s. I know that's not ancient Roman, but from the 1840 or 1540s, perfectly preserved, the half that landed in the mud of the English Channel. And there were so many musical instruments that they found on it. They found viels, they found recorders, they found, I think, drums as well, very well preserved. And so this shows us that musical life aboard ships was rich. And they probably played whatever was popular, popular music of their homeland, or maybe even taught themselves to play the style of music that they may have encountered in other places. Right? I do know that there have been ancient Roman and ancient Greek shipwrecks with musical instruments on them. I think a lyre was found on one of the ancient Greek ships. I seem to remember some kind of pan's flute-like things found on either the Greek ships and or the Roman ships. I'd be interested to know about what kind of musical instruments that might have been found on, say, the shipwrecks of ancient and medieval Arab traders in the Indian Ocean and sort of in the Spice Islands as well. That would be very interesting. We don't know much. We know a little bit about ancient Roman music. We actually have some notation, a very few pieces of musical notation from ancient Rome and ancient Greece. I don't think we have an entire composition, but we have phrases. We have short phrases that have survived and have been found. And I have somehow found like the one spot on the whole river where the sun is about to get to me sooner than anywhere else. That's good, my luck. Anyway, these bits of music. And I recently read that some musicologists think they have interpreted the musical notation successfully. And so you can actually listen to this musical notation played on instruments from the era. And it's very, even the little bit that they have is very interesting and complex, even though it's just the bass melody line, they're not full arrangements, is interesting and complex, sophisticated. I don't know how better to describe it than that. Sounds more like early medieval music than, you know, more modern classical or instrumental music. I would, yeah, would be closer to that. And you know, the history of jazz is fascinating. Some of you know, in my other life, I'm a big vintage dance girl, so I love music, you know, dances and music from the 20s through the 40s. Yeah, big fan of vintage jazz. Okay, any other questions or comments about piracy, life on these ships? And I'll show you depictions, actually. This is actually from the Livre des Merveilles. This is the Jean Duc de Berry, the same man who has the beautiful hours of John the Duke of Berry, right? Another bibliophile of the 15th century. So this is pictures of these pirates as depicted in the early 15th century. Right? There we go, yeah. So this is how those pirates are depicted in Marco Polo's Book of Marvels, his Book of Wonders, right? And let me see if we can specifically see. Nope, they don't sew. The soldiers were unable to land in Java, right? So this is how this is, and the lower part is opposite bottom. So this is depicting the island of Sumatra. The top one is the island of Sumatra, and the sailors going to the island of Sumatra. And then the lower one is how the soldiers of the Great Khan were unable to land in Java. And I think these are actually like mer people dragging them to their death. Yeah. Yeah, Marco Polo's Book of Wonders is a very interesting read. Very interesting. Some of it is very clearly completely fictitious, but a lot of the accounts that are presented there actually align with contemporary local sources discussing the history of those places from those places. So it's always interesting when that aligns. Okay, let me see. I wonder if the pirate kids stayed on their mothership while the parents raided. Yeah, that's an interesting question. It is an yeah, the detail there is the children are on the ship. What are the children doing while the action is happening? You know, obviously the corsairs board the other people's ships, so it would make sense for the children and the wives possibly to stay behind. But on the other hand, the wives might have been engaged as well. You know, there's some pretty fascinating stories and histories about pirate queens in the Indian Ocean, by the way. Her name, one of them in particular, is escaping me right now. When did the trope of pirates being queer adjacent arise? Do we know? Pirates being queer adjacent. I'm actually not familiar with that trope. It's certainly not a medieval one. Are you talking about sailors in general, about there being some kind of homosexuality between sailors? You know, back to the ancient Greeks for certain. but you know, the idea of sexuality, of sexual orientation has fluctuated and changed so much over the centuries, over the millennia, that it's sometimes tricky and incorrect, maybe even, to try to apply our modern ideas of gender identity, of sexual orientation to historical populations. So, you know, that's a really tricky question. I do know, of course, that in the ancient world, in the ancient Mediterranean, there were certainly homosexual relationships between sailors and soldiers, but that didn't necessarily make them homosexual. It made them sexual. Yeah. Roman music reconstructions have August and double aulus. Susan, I think maybe autocorrect played havoc with your comment. If you're into ancient music, look up Lament for Enkidu on here. Oh yeah, the Lament for Enkidu. I think that the Lament for Enkidu, I think, is the oldest piece of music that we have been able to reasonably interpret and recreate. Yeah. The Lament for Enkidu, in case you're wondering, everyone, is from the Epic of Gilgamesh from ancient Babylon, from ancient Mesopotamia. So yeah, that's one of the oldest epics that we have, if not the oldest epic that we have in its basically in its entirety. And the Lament for Enkidu is, of course, Gilgamesh lamenting the loss of his bosom companion, of his soulmate. And some people like to interpret that sexually. But in the epic, it's very clear that Enkidu and Gilgamesh are two halves of the same coin, or actually sort of allegory for the civilized man and the uncivilized man. But anyway, we're not going to get into Gilgamesh right now. That's a topic for a later story time. No instruments actually found on Roman ships, however, it was written about. I could have swore I saw that a lyre was found on, maybe it was an ancient Greek ship. I watched The Raising of the Mary Rose, but didn't know that. Yeah. If you check out the Mary Rose Museum, I think it's in Portsmouth, they actually have on display some of these instruments, and they're looking remarkably good for having been underwater for 460 years or however long it was until they raised the Mary Rose again. Gotta love preservative mud. Yeah, anaerobic mud for the win, my friends. Love it. Love the anaerobic mud. Very interesting to see how people try to smuggle jewels. Reminds me of the Romanovs sewing them into their clothes. Yep. People get really creative. They really do. And I guess what this shows, this 13th century text, is that for a very long time, people have been swallowing things to smuggle them to safety one way or the other. Yeah, tamarind flavored pizza. Oh, I don't think so. That doesn't sound great. That does not sound great at all. What are your thoughts on Cartesian dualism? The sun is starting to make it. That's why I'm squinting. There's sunlight. No. What are your thoughts on Cartesian dualism and how human relationships with the natural world have changed through the ages? Oh, wow. Yeah, Cartesian dualism. There's a topic. I haven't discussed Cartesian dualism since my university days. Cartesian is Descartes, René Descartes, for those who are wondering. God, I would, I'm going to be honest. I'm going to have to, I'm not even going to, I haven't looked at, I know this is going to shock some of you. I haven't looked at Cartesian dualism in about 25 years, 23 years. How old am I? 22 years. So I tell you what, I'm going to go and refresh my memory so I can answer that question more reliably in our next medieval story time. And even though René Descartes is, late 16th century and really more Renaissance than medieval, we'll do a reading. We'll do one of Descartes' readings on dualism, and then we'll discuss it there. How does that sound? I mean this in a respectful way. I totally get that. That seems like a serious low-cut neckline for a dress from the quote-unquote olden days. Is that period correct? Yes. Okay, so I've had this question a lot. So this neckline, if you look at women in this gown, which is a kirtle from this sort of second quarter of the 15th century, so like from the 1410s all the way through to the end of the 15th century, you're going to see very low-cut necklines, just like this. Medieval people in Western Europe anyway were not prudish, and sometimes you'll see lower cut necklines. In fact, they're at the end of the 14th and into the early 15th century, and then again at the last quarter of the 15th century, we get completely off-shoulder gowns with breasts really perkily perched above that neckline. So yes, medieval people just aren't prudish about things like that. That prudish attitude towards attire springs up with the Reformation, and it's the Protestants who take umbrage to women being sexy because apparently men can't control themselves. No, I appreciate that question. That's a question I see a lot. Medieval people were not prudish. They just weren't. And if anytime you see women covering their chest, like someone came and argued back with, well, look at all these places where they're covering their décolleté. It's not about modesty. It's about it's winter and it's cold. The gowns are low cut, so they need to have something to go on top to cover the low cut neckline. Yeah. So yeah, this is 100% period accurate. And just so you all know, I'm actually wearing, for a noblewoman, I'm wearing my underthings. And that's because I didn't feel like hauling all my stuff a couple of miles out here with my equipment and all the overlayers when it's about to get to be 100 degrees. But normally there should be a layer over top of this one. But even that would be pretty low cut. So yeah, low cut 15th century, very much. End of 14th century, especially in Bohemia at the end of the 14th century, and Eastern sort of Central Europe, necklines get real titillating. Yeah. Yep, I totally take that. Yes, on the Greek lyre fittings, in fact. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so Cosmic, we'll talk about Cartesian dualism next time, and we'll do a text that discusses it so we can really get into the meat and the nitty-gritty. Yep. As a Protestant Lutheran, this makes sense. Yeah, it's the Protestants, man. Let me tell you, misogyny increases drastically with the Reformation because the Protestants toss away any aspects of Christianity that give women power. They get rid of the Marian cult. The Virgin Mary is demoted to just the woman that gives birth to Jesus. She's no longer the mother of God, really. Powerful saints, all these powerful female saints. Nope, no more saints. So there go women. The monastic communities where women held lots of power, those are gone as well. Yeah, so really the Reformation, it contributes pretty heavily to women's fallen status throughout Europe. Yeah, a lot of the issues that people attribute to medieval Christianity have nothing to do with medieval Christianity, but are all about the Protestant Reformation. Let me see. That sounds great. I'm an anthropology student, and my focus is on contemporary perspectives on the natural world. So it's interesting. So it's interesting to learn about how these things have changed. Yep, well, definitely that I'll try to remind myself. Rene Descartes, passage on dualism. I will get there. Risque is okay. Getting chill and sick is not. Yeah, talking about why some women, many women, are depicted in 15th century Europe as having covered necklines. Back to the neckline thing. I know I'm bouncing around. That's because I'm responding to the comments. Back to the neckline issue. The reason that you start seeing those necklines covered in the second half of the 15th century, especially, is because the little ice ages come on. So the gowns still have low necklines, but they've actually developed a garment that goes over. It's called a colletto, variously a colletto or a gorgière in French. It's this little like mini cloak kind of thing almost that literally just covers this area and the shoulders and the neck a little bit. And you'll see it. They're usually black velvet in France and Burgundy and even England. Sometimes there'll be some kind of vestigial silk, ephemeral garment, right? But the gowns are still low neckline. That's why they have that extra thing on top to cover all the skin that would be exposed normally by that low neckline. Okay. Okay, any other questions? Questions, comments, concerns? It's starting to warm up here. So I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up today's Medieval Storytime live stream, but I'm going to get back into the live stream rhythm, everyone. We're going to have this week, there's going to be medieval sewing parties all week. I'm going to try to be getting out early in the morning and we'll be doing some medieval sewing together. How was the quality of the video? I don't know how much longer I'll have any kind of high data mobile high speed mobile data to be able to do these out in nature. But either way, we're going to get back into our medieval sewing parties. So I'll be sewing with you all, working on things and talking about anything that comes to mind and answering your questions. More medieval story time. And there was another series. Oh yeah, I think I'm going to try to figure out a way to set up a medieval cooking in a modern setting live stream. I don't have the capability here to do medieval recipes in medieval equipment, but I do have the ability to do medieval recipes in a modern kitchen. And so maybe we can do like medieval cook along with the Contessa. So yeah, we're going to be getting back into the regular medieval live stream. So don't forget to like and subscribe, and make sure you click the notifications bell and make sure that all is clicked, because YouTube has been resetting people's notifications on their apps and sometimes even randomly on your account. So make sure that if you want to be notified when I do things, that you make sure the notification bell is pressed. I am going to try to be doing some dance practice out here as well in the cool hours of the morning. So if you want to watch me just practicing through dances with music, then stay tuned for that as well. And what do I have coming up? I've got some long format videos I'm working on. I'm close to finishing my video essay on medieval rings, and I'll be publishing that. That is sponsored by my channel sponsor, Armor and Castings. I'm not wearing any armor and castings anything right now. I'm kind of embarrassed, but they are one of my channel sponsors. Check out their amazing medieval jewelry replicas, armorandcastings.com. Contessa 10 is the promo code. If you buy anything, you'll get 10% off, even off of sale items. I'd like to thank my channel members and my patrons on Patreon for financially supporting me. Takeda, you're out there. Twitchy Witch might be out there. I'm not certain if any of my other channel members or patrons are out there. Oh, Laurie, you're out there. So I thank you all for, putting literally financially supporting my work. YouTube doesn't pay almost anything in terms of ad revenues. So it's really you all who are making it possible for me to do this, to share this knowledge and these experience and my learnings with you, and to take you on my journey of historical exploration. I also thank those of you who are my super fans, Susan, who are always leaving comments, always tuning into all of my live streams across all of my channels. Thomas, if you're out there, I appreciate all the ways you all have supported me, have joined my community, and gone along with me on this crazy adventure. If you're watching this as a recording and I got questions, pop them in the comments. I will answer them. Just one more check through the comments to see. I want the book. What was it called again? The book is A Medieval Miscellany by Judith Heron. And if someone reminds me in the comments, not the live chat, but the comments, to publish the picture with the information of the book, I'll publish it in my community posts on my various social media, my various media platforms. Yeah. I love your outfit. Thank you, Waterfall. Much appreciated. Let's see, other comments. Thank you for the stories. First time here. Cosmic, thank you. Welcome to my community. Thank you for joining in. I really appreciate it. It's great having you along. I mean, I have to tell you, I'm so excited that you asked me my opinion about Cartesian dualism. I mean, that's my kind of geekdom. I love having a reason to go back into those sorts of things. Yay, cooking. I love what you do. I would love to get the books you use. Yeah. Everyone, if you go back through, no matter what social media platform you're on, if you go back through my posts, whenever I do one of these book readings, I then will do a post with the pictures of the books that I've read through. So stay tuned for that post. And if you scroll back through my post, you can see other books that I have discussed with. And of course, at the end of all of my medieval sewing parties, we have the Medieval Book Corner, where I share my latest book recommendations with you. I love your video and content. Oh, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And thanks for providing the medical chime in. Really appreciate it. Oh, handsome. My condottiero is always there working hard to keep me going. Yeah. Let me see, just scrolling back. Okay, everyone. Well, I'm going to flee before it gets too hot. Thank you all. Until next time, everyone, stay creative and may your adventures be educational. Bye, everyone.